My mother packed my suitcase before anyone actually asked me to leave. That was the moment I understood the decision had been made long before I walked upstairs. 10 minutes earlier, I had been standing in the Bennett family dining room while my father raised a glass and announced that Jordan would become the future president of Bennett Development. Everyone applauded. My mother smiled. Jordan looked stunned, which was somehow worse than if he had looked pleased. I stood near the end of the table with a glass of sparkling water and tried to remember whether there was an appropriate facial expression for discovering that your family had replaced you between the salad course and dessert. Apparently there was. It was called smiling politely. By the time I reached my old bedroom, a black suitcase was already open on the bed. Mom was folding one of my sweaters into it. Neatly, carefully, like emotional abandonment required excellent organization. "What are you doing?" I asked. She did not stop folding. "Helping you." That is a fascinating definition of help. She finally looked at me. "Tyler, please do not make this harder than it needs to be." There it was. The sentence people used when they had already decided whose feelings mattered. I stepped farther into the room. My childhood baseball trophies were still on the shelf. A framed photograph from high school sat beside the lamp. Everything looked exactly like home except for the suitcase swallowing pieces of my life. "How long were you planning this?" Mom pressed her lips together. "Your father and I have been discussing what is healthiest for everyone." Everyone is a very efficient word. "Jordan needs stability right now." I nodded slowly. "For Jordan." Silence. That was the answer. My chest tightened, but I refused to let my voice do the same. "So where am I supposed to go?" "You have always been independent." I almost laughed. Independent. Another convenient word. It sounded much nicer than easier to lose. "That is not an address. We thought you could stay downtown for a while. Your father can arrange a hotel." "How generous." "Tyler." "No, really. Nothing says family like complimentary checkout at 11. Her face softened for half a second. That almost hurt more. "This is not permanent." "Did Dad tell Jordan that?" She looked away. I had my answer again. I walked to the closet and pulled out the rest of my clothes. Mom reached for them. I stepped back. "I can pack my own things." I was trying to make this easier. "For who?" She stopped. Neither of us said anything. Downstairs, I could still hear voices from the celebration. Someone laughed. A glass clinked. Jordan was being welcomed into a future I had apparently been removed from so quietly that nobody had even bothered to argue with me first. 15 minutes later, I carried the suitcase downstairs. Dad stood near the foyer with 2 board members. He glanced at the luggage, then at me. "Your mother explained?" She folded beautifully. His jaw tightened. "Do not turn this into a scene." I looked around the room. "I am carrying one suitcase, Dad. I think the scene already happened." He lowered his voice. "Jordan has had a difficult life. He needs to feel secure in this family. And I do not." Dad said nothing. That silence followed me through the front door. Outside, the night air felt cold against my face. I pulled the suitcase down the long driveway, listening to the wheels bump over every seam in the pavement. I had almost reached the gate when headlights slowed beside me. A dark sedan stopped. The driver door opened, and a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out. Mason Reed. I recognized him from dinner, one of the outside legal advisors seated near my father. He looked at the suitcase, then at me. He did not ask whether I was all right. Maybe my face had saved him the trouble. "Where are you going?" he asked. I tightened my grip on the handle. "Apparently anywhere that is not here." Mason looked back toward the house, then at me again. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" "I will figure it out." That was not what I asked. I stared at him. He held my gaze without pity. Somehow that made answering harder. "No," I said. "Mason, open the passenger door. Then let me drive you somewhere while you figure it out." I stared at Mason for a second longer than necessary. Getting into a stranger's car, after being quietly removed from my family home, felt like the opening scene of a terrible decision. But standing beside the gate with one suitcase and nowhere to sleep was not exactly winning any awards either. "I can get a rideshare," I said. Mason rested one hand on the open passenger door. "You can. I have money." "I did not ask if you had money. You ask very inconvenient questions." "I have been told." I looked back toward the Bennett house. Warm light spilled through the windows. From 60 feet away, it still looked like home. Architecture was apparently very good at lying. I put my suitcase in Mason's trunk and climbed into the passenger seat. He did not ask what happened until we were several miles away. He did not turn on music either. Just quiet road noise, passing streetlights, and enough silence for my thoughts to become annoyingly organized. They did not throw me out, I said eventually. Mason kept his eyes on the road. I did not say they did. They just think some distance would be healthier. For you? I looked out the window. For Jordan. Mason nodded once. Somehow that small motion irritated me. I chose to leave. Did you? I turned toward him. Excuse me. You had a packed suitcase waiting upstairs. My jaw tightened. My mother was helping. Was she? You are remarkably judgmental for someone billing my father by the hour. I was advising one of the investors at dinner. Your father is not my client. Great. Even my insult had poor due diligence. I folded my arms. Fine. I am independent. I can handle this. Mason was quiet for several seconds. Independence usually involves having a choice. That landed badly because it landed accurately. You do not know anything about my family. Correct. Then maybe do not diagnose it during a 15-minute drive. I am not diagnosing your family. His voice remained calm. I am listening to you rename what happened because the real word makes them look bad. I looked at him. And what real word would that be? Mason stopped at a red light and finally met my eyes. Abandonment. My chest went tight. That is dramatic. Maybe. The light changed. He drove forward. But do not rename. Abandonment just because the truth embarrasses them. I did not answer for the rest of the drive. Mason took me to a clean motel near the airport after I rejected his first 3 suggestions for being too expensive. The room cost $112 for the night and smelled faintly like industrial lemon cleaner. Perfect. Nothing encouraged emotional recovery like carpet with an unclear history. Mason carried my suitcase to the door, then handed me a business card. If you need anything, call me. I looked at the card. Mason read. Corporate counsel. A Boston number. I am not calling you for money. Good. I was not offering money. A place to stay? Only if you ask. A job? Not tonight. I almost smiled. Then what exactly are you offering? Mason considered that. A person who knows where you are. The answer caught me off guard. He stepped back. No attempt to come inside. No dramatic promise to fix my life. Just space. Get some sleep, Tyler. How do you know my first name? We were introduced at dinner. Right. Excellent memory. You look like the only person at that table who wanted to escape before dessert. That earned a real laugh. Brief and unwilling. Mason smiled. There. Better. Do not get confident. Good night. He walked toward the parking lot. I stood in the doorway holding his card while cold air moved through the motel walkway. Mason. He turned. Thank you. His expression softened. You are welcome. Then he left. Inside, I placed the business card on the nightstand beside my phone. There were 3 messages waiting from Mom. 1 from Dad. None from Jordan. I did not open any of them. Instead, I booked the cheapest flight I could find to Seattle for the next morning, where an old college friend had already offered me his couch until I figured something out. At 24 years old, with 1 suitcase, $1,200 in checking, and absolutely no plan beyond leaving Massachusetts, I told myself I was starting over. It sounded much stronger than admitting I had nowhere I wanted to return to. Seattle did not fix me, which felt rude considering how far I had traveled to give it the opportunity. 18 months. After leaving Massachusetts, I had become very good at looking like someone who had planned everything. I was 25, renting a small 1-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, working as a financial analyst for a regional logistics company, and owning exactly 3 pieces of furniture that had not come from a second-hand store. Progress. My office was 12 minutes away by bus. My coffee shop knew my order, and nobody there cared who my father was. That last part was worth more than the furniture. I built routines because routines did not suddenly decide another person needed your place more than you did. Monday reports. Wednesday grocery runs. Friday takeout. Sunday laundry. Very glamorous. Very emotionally stable. Mostly. Mason still texted every few weeks. Never too much. Never with questions that felt like surveillance. Sometimes he sent a photo of terrible airport coffee with a complaint about corporate travel. Sometimes he asked whether Seattle rain was as dramatic as advertised. On my 25th birthday, a message appeared at exactly 8 in the morning. Happy birthday. I hope you upgraded from motel carpet. I stared at it longer than necessary before replying. I now have hardwood floors and unrealistic confidence. He answered, proud of your growth. That was Mason. Present without pushing. Somehow that made it harder to keep him filed under person I met during worst night of my life. My family was easier. Dad sent short emails every few months, usually about practical matters. Mom called more often at first, then less when I stopped pretending our conversations were normal. Jordan never contacted me. I told myself that was fine. I became excellent at saying things were fine. It was practically a professional certification. One Thursday afternoon, I was halfway through reviewing shipping forecasts when my phone vibrated beside my keyboard. Boston area code. I almost ignored it. Then it rang again. I stepped into an empty conference room. Tyler Bennett, a woman asked when I answered. Yes. My name is Rebecca Sloan. I am calling from Hawthorne Family Counsel regarding Eleanor Hawthorne. My hand tightened around the phone. My grandmother, Mom, had called 3 days earlier to tell me Eleanor had died. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Cancer. Peaceful. Private service planned in Boston. That was almost everything I knew. I am sorry, I said. What is this about? Mrs. Hawthorne left instructions requiring your presence for the administration of her trust. I frowned. There has to be a mistake. There is not. We were not close. A pause. Mrs. Hawthorne may have viewed that differently. I looked through the conference room glass at coworkers moving between desks, carrying coffee, complaining about deadlines. My normal life continued 6 feet away while something old reached across the country and grabbed my attention. What kind of trust? I asked. I am not authorized to discuss the details by phone. We have scheduled the initial meeting for Monday at 10 in Boston. Travel arrangements can be covered by the estate. I almost laughed. Of course they can. Will you attend? My first instinct was no. Boston meant my parents. The Bennett house. Every road I had spent 18 months putting 3,000 miles behind me. Then I remembered Eleanor's birthday cards. Always handwritten. Always addressed to Tyler, never to the Bennett family. One year she had written, never confuse distance with indifference. I had been 16 and assumed she meant herself. Maybe she had. Yes, I said. I will be there. After the call, I stood alone in the conference room for another minute. Then my phone buzzed again. Mason. I had not told him anything. His message contained 6 words. I heard about Eleanor. Are you okay? I stared at the screen. There were easier questions in finance. I typed, I'm flying back Sunday. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, if you need anything while you are here, call me. I smiled despite myself. 18 months ago, Mason had given me a business card and offered to be one person who knew where I was. Apparently, he had meant it. I looked out at the gray Seattle sky and felt something I had avoided naming since the night I left. I was going back. Not home. I was no longer willing to call it that. But back. Monday morning, I walked into Hawthorne Family Counsel expecting a quiet explanation about jewelry, maybe a savings account, and possibly one aggressively antique chair nobody wanted. Instead, I found Mason sitting beside a conference table covered with legal folders. He stood when I entered. You made it. That sounds optimistic considering I have been in Boston for approximately 14 hours. His expression softened. How was the flight? A child kicked my seat for 5 hours, so emotionally educational. Before Mason could answer, Rebecca Sloan entered carrying a sealed envelope. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, calm, and dressed like someone who had spent decades watching wealthy families discover that money did not improve communication. Mr. Bennett, she said, thank you for coming. I sat across from her. Mason remained to my right. Why is he here? I asked. Mason glanced at Rebecca. I serve as outside counsel to the Hawthorne family office. I stared at him. Of course you do. Apparently Boston had decided subtlety was overrated. Rebecca opened the first folder. Your grandmother, Eleanor Hawthorne, was the controlling owner of Hawthorne Group through the Hawthorne Family Trust. I waited. I thought Hawthorne Group was an investment company. It is. A very large investment company. Yes. My stomach tightened. Hawthorne Group owns stakes in real estate, manufacturing, infrastructure, and private companies across the country. I had heard the name in finance meetings in Seattle. I had never connected it to the grandmother my parents described as difficult, private, and financially comfortable. Financially comfortable was apparently Bennett family language for extremely wealthy. My mother never told me any of this. Rebecca's expression did not change. Your mother and Eleanor had been estranged for many years. She slid a photograph toward me. Eleanor stood outside a glass office tower beneath a Hawthorne Group sign. Younger, sharp-eyed, completely at home. Why? I asked. That answer belongs partly to your family, Rebecca said. But Eleanor documented her concerns. She strongly disagreed with the way your parents used Bennett development, succession expectations, and financial dependence to influence family relationships. My mind flashed to Mom folding my sweater into a suitcase. Independence usually involves having a choice. Mason had said that 18 months ago. Rebecca continued. Eleanor followed your education and career from a distance. She knew you moved to Seattle. She knew where you worked. She knew you had built a life independently. I looked at Mason. He became very still. That question would wait. Rebecca pushed another document toward me. Under the trust, you are the primary successor beneficiary. Following an administrative transition period, you will receive controlling voting rights associated with Eleanor's interest in Hawthorne Group, subject to professional trustees, fiduciary obligations, and governance procedures. I stared at the page. The numbers stopped behaving like numbers after a certain point. You are saying I control Hawthorne Group. Not like a personal bank account, Rebecca said. You cannot simply take corporate assets. Professional management remains in place. But once the transition is completed, you will hold the controlling beneficiary position and substantial governance rights. I leaned back. Yesterday, I was calculating freight margins in Seattle. Mason almost smiled. You can continue doing that if you want. I looked at him. Very comforting. Rebecca placed the sealed envelope in front of me. My name was handwritten across it. Tyler. Just Tyler. I opened it carefully. Eleanor's handwriting filled 2 pages. The first sentence stopped me. They taught you that being unwanted made you small. Do not inherit my money and make the same mistake. I swallowed and kept reading. Do not use this fortune to make them smaller. Use it to discover how large your life can become without them. My vision blurred for a second. I hated that paper could do that. Eleanor wrote that she regretted allowing family conflict to keep her distant. She said she had watched from afar because she feared interfering would give my parents another reason to control who I could trust. She ended with one sentence. You were never abandoned because you were difficult to love. You were abandoned because some people mistake control for love and panic when they cannot control you. I lowered the letter. Nobody spoke. Finally, I looked at Rebecca. Why now? The trust required an 18-month separation period after you ceased receiving material support from the Bennett family. Eleanor wanted evidence that you had established an independent life before the transfer. 18 months. Exactly the amount of time since the suitcase. I laughed quietly, because apparently my grandmother had designed an inheritance around my parents proving her point. Rebecca closed the folder. There is another matter. Naturally, Hawthorne Group is currently reviewing several strategic investment opportunities. She slid a briefing page toward me. Near the top was a familiar name. Bennett Development. I read it twice. My father's company wants Hawthorne money. They have requested preliminary discussions regarding a major redevelopment project. I looked at Mason. He held my gaze calmly. Does my family know who the new beneficiary is? No, he said. For the first time since returning to Boston, I smiled without forcing it. Then I imagine the next meeting is going to be interesting. After Rebecca left the conference room, I stayed in my chair staring at the Bennett development briefing while Mason quietly gathered the legal folders beside me. The silence lasted exactly long enough for suspicion to become productive. How much did you know? I asked. Mason stopped. About what? Do not make me create categories. I have inherited enough paperwork today. He set the folder down. I knew Eleanor wanted to help you. My stomach tightened. Before you left Massachusetts. I looked at him. You knew that night. I knew she was concerned about you. I did not know the details of the trust. But you knew she was watching. Yes. I stood and walked toward the window because sitting suddenly felt too cooperative. So the motel, the messages, checking on me for 18 months. Was that all for her? Mason did not answer immediately. Bad sign. Some of it involved a promise I made to Eleanor. I laughed once. Fantastic. I thought you were being kind. Turns out I was part of a client update. His expression changed. Tyler, no. Did you report where I lived? Only information you gave me voluntarily. That is not comforting. I never tracked you. I never contacted your employer. I never shared anything private you asked me to keep private. I turned toward him. Then what exactly did you tell her? Mason exhaled. That you were safe. That you had work. That you had an apartment. That you sounded more settled each time we spoke. So yes. Reports. Updates. That is reports wearing a nicer jacket. He looked frustrated for the first time since I had met him. Eleanor was dying, Tyler. She wanted to know you were building a life without Bennett money before the trust transferred. She also made me promise not to tell you about the inheritance until counsel was legally permitted to disclose it. And you agreed. Yes. Why? Because she believed telling you early would drag you back into a family fight before you were ready. I crossed my arms. Everybody seems very interested in deciding what I am ready for. That landed. Mason went quiet. Then he nodded. You are right. No defense. No correction. Somehow that made staying angry more difficult. I should have told Eleanor that the promise put me in an unfair position with you. He looked directly at me. I did not. Before I could answer, his tablet lit up on the table with an incoming email notification. He reached for it, but I had already seen my name in the preview. Tyler seems better. Eleanor's reply below it appeared in the thread. Does he still think leaving means nobody chose him? I froze. Mason noticed. Tyler, what is that? He closed his eyes briefly, then unlocked the tablet and turned it toward me. You should read the whole exchange if you are going to read any of it. I hesitated, then took it. The email was dated 7 months earlier. Mason had written that I had started joking about work, that I complained about Seattle rent like someone planning to stay, and that I finally sounded proud when describing my apartment. Eleanor replied with the question I had seen. Does he still think leaving means nobody chose him? Mason's answer was beneath it. I choose him. He just does not know what that means yet. I read the sentence twice, then a third time, because apparently comprehension became optional when someone quietly rearranged your emotional furniture. What did you mean? I asked. Mason looked almost uncomfortable. Exactly what I wrote. That is not an explanation. I cared whether you were all right before I knew you would inherit anything. His voice was calm, but softer now. I kept texting because I wanted to. I remembered your birthday because I wanted to. I asked about your apartment because I wanted to know what your life looked like. I looked down at the tablet. You never said anything. You had just been told that one person belonging meant you had to disappear. The last thing you needed was someone else demanding a place in your life. My throat tightened. So you waited. I stayed available. That was annoyingly Mason. Precise even when saying something that made breathing less efficient. I handed the tablet back. You realize this is extremely inconvenient. A small smile appeared. I was hoping for slightly better than that. Do not get ambitious. He nodded toward the Bennett briefing still on the table. There is a dinner Thursday. Your father requested a meeting with Hawthorne representatives. I looked at the company name again. Does he know I will be there? No. Does Jordan? No. 18 months ago, I had left the Bennett house with one suitcase while Mason stood beside a car asking where I was going. Now I was about to walk back into a room where my family expected an investor and find me instead. I picked up the briefing packet. Then I suppose I should read everything. Mason raised an eyebrow. Everything. If I am going to shock my father, I would like the financial statements to support the experience. Thursday night, I walked back into the Bennett estate wearing a navy suit, carrying a Hawthorne Group investment binder, and experiencing the deeply satisfying realization that nobody had packed my clothes for me this time. Mason entered beside me in a charcoal suit, calm as ever, while 2 Hawthorne executives followed several steps behind. The same foyer stretched ahead of us. Same polished floors. Same staircase. Same family photographs. 18 months ago, I had crossed that floor dragging one suitcase toward the door. Tonight, a housekeeper smiled professionally and said, "The Bennett family is waiting in the dining room." Apparently, personal growth came with better entrances. Dad stood when we walked in. Mom sat beside him. Jordan was across the table with Bennett Development's chief financial officer and 2 board members. Dad smiled automatically at Mason. "Mr. Reed, welcome." Then he saw me. The smile disappeared. Nobody spoke. It was remarkable how loud silence became when 6 wealthy people suddenly forgot their vocabulary. "Tyler," Mom said. I placed the Hawthorne binder on the table. "Hi, Mom." Dad looked from me to Mason. "What are you doing here?" I pulled out the empty chair opposite him. "You invited Hawthorne." I sat down. "I am Hawthorne." Jordan stared at me. Mom looked as if she had missed an important page in a book everyone else had finished. Dad recovered first. He always did. "What does that mean?" Mason remained standing until everyone had settled. "Tyler is the successor controlling beneficiary of the Hawthorne Family Trust. The administrative transition is nearing completion, and he is participating in the investment review as beneficiary representative. Dad's face became very still. Eleanor left Hawthorne Group to you. Not exactly. Professional trustees and management still exist. Turns out inheriting wealth comes with disappointing amounts of governance. Nobody laughed. Again, tough room. Dad looked at Mason. Why were we not informed? Because Tyler's inheritance was confidential, Mason said, and because it has no bearing on whether Bennett Development qualifies for investment. I appreciated that. He did not defend me. He defended the process. Dad turned back to me. You could have told us. I almost admired the sentence. 18 months without asking where I lived, and apparently communication standards had suddenly become important. You could have told me you were planning to remove me from the house, I said. Mom looked down. Jordan's expression tightened. Dad opened the investment presentation. We are here to discuss business. Good. I opened my copy. I read the projections. His eyes narrowed slightly. And the redevelopment assumes 92% occupancy within 14 months. The chief financial officer shifted. That is based on comparable properties. Comparable properties in different neighborhoods with lower lease rates. Silence again. I turned another page. Your construction contingency is also below Hawthorne's standard for a project of this size. Dad leaned back. You have been reviewing this for 3 days. I have been working in financial analysis for 18 months. At a logistics company. There it was. Small, casual, familiar. The old instinct rose inside me. Prove yourself. Get louder. Make him admit you belong here. I looked at Mason. He was watching me, but he gave no signal. No rescue. My choice. I turned back to Dad. Then it should be easy to answer my questions. Jordan lowered his eyes, hiding what might have been a smile. For the next hour, the room became exactly what Dad had requested. A business meeting. We discussed cash flow, projected rents, construction costs, debt exposure, and governance. Hawthorne was interested, but only under revised assumptions and stronger independent oversight. I did not reject the project. I did not approve it either. I asked questions. Good ones. By the end, Dad looked less shocked by my inheritance than by the fact that I understood the documents better than he expected. When the meeting ended, Mom approached me near the doorway. Are you staying in Boston? She asked. Such a small question. 18 months late. For now. She nodded as if that answer carried more meaning than I intended. Mason waited in the foyer while I gathered my papers. Then Jordan appeared behind me. Tyler. I turned. He looked nervous. Not polished successor nervous. Younger. Familiar. Can we talk somewhere private? I glanced toward Dad, who was still speaking with the executives. About what? Jordan reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope with my name written across the front. About why you never answered me. I stared at it. Answered what? His face changed. My letters. I felt something. Cold move through my chest. Jordan, you never sent me anything. He looked at me for several seconds. Yes, he said quietly. I did. Jordan led me into the small library off the main hallway, the one Dad used whenever he wanted a conversation to feel more official than human. Mason stayed outside without being asked. I noticed that. He always seemed to know when standing beside me would help and when it would turn something private into a performance. Jordan closed the door and placed the envelope on the desk between us. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. Open it, he said. I did. Inside were 6 letters, all addressed to me. Seattle. Different dates. The earliest had been written 2 weeks after I left. The latest was 3 months ago. None had postage marks. I looked up. Where did you get these? Jordan swallowed. Dad's study. My stomach tightened. Why were they there? Because he never mailed them. The room went very still. I picked up the first letter. Tyler, I do not know if you want to hear from me, but I need you to know I did not ask them to make you leave. I stopped reading. You wrote this 18 months ago? Yes. And Dad kept it. Jordan nodded. I found the whole stack last week. Something hot moved through my chest, but anger was almost easier than what came after it. Why did you never call? I tried once. Mom told me you had changed your number and did not want contact. I stared at him. I have had the same number since college. His face collapsed in a way that made him look 24 instead of the polished successor from the dinner table. I know that now. I looked down at the letters again. They told me you wanted space. They told me you hated me. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Efficient. Jordan sat in the chair opposite the desk. Dad said you blamed me for everything. He said if I contacted you, I would make things worse. Mom told me Jordan needed stability and that my leaving would help. Jordan closed his eyes. Of course she did. I read another letter. In it, Jordan apologized for the succession announcement. He wrote that Dad had been telling him for years that if he did not become indispensable, the family would eventually choose me because I was the biological son. I looked at him. He told you that? Since I was 16. He told me you needed the company more because you had something to prove. Jordan laughed without humor. I did have something to prove. He made sure of that. I sat down across from him. For most of my life, I had pictured Jordan standing where I wanted to be. At Dad's side. In the company. In the family future. I had never considered that he might have been standing there because he was terrified of what happened if he stepped away. Why accept the presidency track? I asked. Because I thought if I said no, they would regret adopting me. The answer landed quietly. No dramatic speech. No villain confession. Just a fear I understood too well. They made me think you replaced me, I said. Jordan looked at the floor. They made me think you would come back and take everything. I glanced at the letters. So they kept us apart. I think they thought it was easier. For who? He gave me a tired look. You already know. I did. That was becoming the problem. I opened the last letter. It was shorter than the others. I hope Seattle is good to you. I hope somebody there knows you are funny when you are uncomfortable and impossible when you are right. I hope you are not alone. I folded it carefully. I was not alone, I said. Jordan looked up. Mason. I raised an eyebrow. That obvious? He watched you during dinner like he was making sure you had an exit. I looked toward the closed door. Annoyingly accurate. He did that the first night too. Jordan was quiet for a moment. I am sorry. I looked back at him. For what part? For believing them. For not trying harder. For every time I competed with you because I thought losing meant I stopped belonging. I exhaled slowly. I blamed you because blaming you was easier than admitting our parents chose the rules. Does that mean you forgive me? No. His face fell slightly. But it means I finally know you were not the person who abandoned me. Jordan nodded. That was enough for now. He stood, then paused by the door. Dad is going to fight the Hawthorne conditions. I expected that. He thinks you are trying to take control. I looked at the letters one more time. I spent 18 months learning how to live without his approval. I closed the envelope. I am not coming back to ask permission now. The final investment meeting took place the following Tuesday at Hawthorne Group, which meant Dad had to enter a building where his last name did not automatically improve the temperature of the room. I arrived 10 minutes early with Mason, Rebecca Sloan, 2 Hawthorne investment officers, and enough financial documents to make revenge seem inefficient compared with simply reading the footnotes. Jordan came with my parents and the Bennett Development Chief Financial Officer. He chose the chair beside me instead of beside Dad. Nobody commented. Everybody noticed. Dad opened with a polished presentation about family legacy, 40 years of development experience, and the importance of keeping strategic decisions stable. Translation: please give me money without changing anything. When he finished, Rebecca turned to me. Tyler, 18 months ago, hearing my name at a Bennett table had usually meant I was about to be compared with Jordan. This time, 6 people waited because my opinion actually mattered. Strange feeling. Surprisingly survivable. I opened the proposal. Hawthorne is prepared to continue negotiations. Mom released a breath. Dad almost smiled. Subject to revised governance conditions, I added. There went the smile. I listed them calmly. 3 independent directors. A professional search for the next chief executive. No automatic executive appointments based solely on family status. Quarterly project reporting. Employee protections if the redevelopment schedule changed. Revised occupancy assumptions based on verified market data rather than optimism wearing a spreadsheet. Dad stared at me. You want to remove the Bennett family from Bennett Development? No. I want Bennett Development to stop treating DNA as a job qualification. Jordan lowered his eyes, but this time he was definitely hiding a smile. Dad leaned forward. Jordan has spent years preparing to lead this company. Before I could answer, Jordan spoke. Then I can compete for the job. Dad turned toward him. What? If I am qualified, an independent search should not scare me. Mom looked stunned. Jordan continued. And if somebody else is better, they should get it. Silence settled across the table. Apparently accountability was contagious. Dad looked back at me. You did this. Jordan has been forming complete sentences without my assistance for years. You turned him against this family. Jordan's expression changed. No. You taught us to turn against each other. Dad became very still. I thought about the 6 letters sitting in my hotel room. You kept his letters from me, I said. Mom looked down. Dad did not deny it. We were trying to prevent more conflict by making sure we each believed the other one wanted nothing to do with us. You do not understand the pressure we were under. I almost laughed. That sentence has been doing impressive work in this family. Mom finally looked at me. Tyler, we made mistakes. Her voice was quiet. Come home. We can fix this. Home. The word used to hurt because I wanted it so badly. Now it just sounded like an address. I am not moving back. Her face fell. Why not? I looked at her carefully. Because I can forgive you someday, without moving back into the place where I learned to disappear. Nobody spoke. Mason sat 2 seats away, hands folded, giving me nothing but space. Dad looked at the Hawthorne proposal again. So this is punishment. No. You come back with Eleanor's money, impose conditions on my company, humiliate me in front of my own board, and call that business? I felt the old anger rise. For once, I did not need to feed it. If I wanted revenge, I would reject the deal and walk away. Dad stared at me. Then why are you helping? Because more than 800 people work for Bennett Development, and none of them packed my suitcase. The chief financial officer looked down, suddenly very interested in his notes. The project can work, I continued. But not if everybody is expected to protect family pride before company stability. Dad's voice dropped. You want control. I shook my head. I spent most of my life wanting something from you. Approval. A place. Proof that I mattered as much as Jordan. I paused. I do not want any of that anymore. Then what did you come back for? I looked at Jordan, then at Mom, then finally at him. I came back because Hawthorne had business here. Dad leaned back. And you are comfortable taking everything from us? I am not taking everything. Then what are you taking? I closed the folder. Nothing. He frowned. I already took back the only thing you were never entitled to control. What? I met his eyes. My life. The room went silent again, but this silence felt different. It did not ask me to shrink. Rebecca moved the restructuring agreement toward the Bennett side of the table. Negotiations would continue. The company could survive. Jordan could choose his own future. My parents could decide what they did with the truth now that they could no longer manage everyone around it. When the meeting ended, Mason and I walked toward the elevators together. He waited until the doors closed before speaking. You did not become what hurt you. I looked at him. For words. That was all. Somehow they reach places inheritance documents never could. Careful, I said. You are becoming emotionally articulate. Mason smiled. Should I apologize? Absolutely not. The elevator descended, and for the first time since returning to Boston, I realized I was no longer measuring the distance back to Seattle. I was wondering what might happen if I stayed long enough to choose where I wanted to go next. 1 month later, I stood inside Boston Logan International Airport holding a boarding pass to Seattle and wondering when airports had become such an aggressive metaphor for my emotional problems. Hawthorne Group had approved the Bennett investment under the revised governance plan. Dad accepted the independent directors after discovering that refusing capital was apparently less attractive than sharing control. Jordan withdrew from the automatic succession track and entered the professional chief executive search like every other candidate. Mom had started sending messages that did not contain the phrase "we only wanted what was best," which counted as progress. I had not forgiven my parents completely. I had also stopped needing them to become different people before I could keep living. That part felt new. Seattle was still my apartment, my job, my coffee shop, my routines. Boston had become something else. Complicated. Familiar. Less powerful over me. I had spent the last month completing the first stage of my Hawthorne responsibilities, sitting through investment meetings, learning trust governance, and discovering that inherited wealth came with approximately 14 million opportunities for someone to say fiduciary obligation. Mason had been there through all of it. Never hovering. Never deciding for me. Just present. He drove me to the airport that morning because I had made the strategic error of mentioning my flight time. You know rideshare applications exist, I told him as we approached security. I am aware. Very advanced technology. I wanted to drive you. That shut me up for almost 4 seconds. We stopped near the windows, overlooking the runway. Travelers moved around us with rolling bags and paper coffee cups. My flight began boarding in 40 minutes. Mason put his hands in the pockets of his dark coat. He looked unusually uncertain. I enjoyed that for about 3 seconds before realizing uncertainty on Mason usually meant something important was coming. What? I asked. Nothing. You have spent 18 months asking inconvenient questions. I recognized the face. He looked toward the runway. I have spent 18 months trying very hard not to ask you for something you were not ready to give. My heartbeat changed. That is alarmingly specific. Mason turned back to me. You learned how to leave people before they could leave you. I looked down at the boarding pass. That sounds healthier when I call it independence. I know. No judgment. Just fact. He took a breath. I also know Seattle matters to you. I am not asking you to give up your life there. Then what are you asking? Stay. One word. Somehow louder than the airport. I looked at him. Stay for Hawthorne? No. For my family? Definitely not. That almost made me laugh. Mason stepped a little closer. Still leaving comfortable space between us. Stay one more week. Have dinner with me when nobody is discussing debt ratios or corporate governance. Let me show you what Boston looks like when you are not trying to escape it. I stared at him. That is your version of begging? His mouth curved slightly. I am trying to maintain dignity. Weak commitment. I can get on my knees emotionally. I laughed. Actually laughed. Right beside gate C19, while an announcement reminded someone named Patricia that boarding doors were closing. Mason's expression softened, then became serious again. Please stay. There it was. No joke protecting it. Not because you owe anyone anything. Not because Eleanor left you money. Not because Bennett Development needs you. His gray eyes held mine. Stay because I want more time with you. My throat tightened. 18 months ago, I had stood outside the Bennett estate with one suitcase while Mason asked where I was going. I had not known. I had only known I needed to leave. Now I had a boarding pass, an apartment waiting 3,000 miles away, and a life I had built because nobody else had built one for me. I also had a choice. That was the difference. I looked at the departure screen, then at Mason. 1 week. 1 week. 1 dinner. I was hoping for several. Ambitious. You encouraged honesty. I pulled out my phone. Mason watched without saying anything as I opened the airline application and changed my flight to the following Saturday. The confirmation appeared on the screen. Mason looked at me. You changed it. Do not make this dramatic. I would never. You asked me to stay in an airport. You lost that privilege. He smiled, and something warm settled inside my chest. Not obligation. Not rescue. Not the desperate relief of finally being chosen by someone important. Something quieter. I chose this too. So, I said, slipping my phone into my pocket. Where are we having dinner? Mason picked up my suitcase. I know a place. I raised an eyebrow. That sentence has historically been dangerous for me. Trust me. I looked at him, then toward the exit instead of the gate. 18 months ago, leaving had been the first decision that felt like mine. Now staying was the second. And for the first time in my life, neither choice needed anyone else's permission.